The main furnace roared at a constant 2,000 degrees, casting a pulsing, dense orange light across the concrete floor, but the detail that broke the symmetry of my industrial studio was the stark white designer trench coat standing completely still in the freezing rain outside my window. I wiped a streak of charcoal soot from my forehead with the back of my wrist, squinting through the water-blurred glass. No one wore silk blend coats in the warehouse district behind the downtown farmers market, especially not in a Tuesday downpour. The woman was clutching a damp, crushed cardboard box to her chest like it was a shield. I set my blowpipe onto the metal yoke, stepped backward to unlock the bay door, and immediately caught the heel of my boot on the edge of a rubber floor mat. My foot kicked an empty aluminum bucket, sending it clanging loudly across the room. Oops. Sorry, I muttered to the empty space, wincing at the echoing metallic crash. I fumbled with the deadbolt, finally yanking the corrugated metal door upward. A gust of damp, freezing wind rushed in, instantly colliding with the brutal, suffocating heat of the studio. She stood on the threshold. Her dark hair was pinned up in a complex twist, though the wind had torn several wet strands loose, plastering them against her jawline. She projected a professional, expensive aura, yet her posture was entirely cornered. "Are you Nixon Ramos?" she asked. Her voice carried over the sound of the rain, steady and clear, but her knuckles were stark white against the deteriorating cardboard box. "Yes, that's me." I stepped back, gesturing with a thick Kevlar glove. "Come in. You're getting soaked out there. Just watch your step around the air compressor hoses." "I'm Amaya Hall," she said, stepping into the cavernous heat. She didn't glance at the scattered hand tools, the massive bags of silica sand, or the towering glory hole furnace radiating heat in the center of the room. Her gaze stayed locked on the box in her arms. "I was told you are the only person left in the city who understands the Ventura color fusing technique." "I don't take restoration commissions anymore," I explained, dropping my glove onto a wooden stool. "I just make functional pieces now. Pitchers, thick glassware. It's safer." I reached for a clean cotton rag to wipe my hands, misjudging the edge of the table and letting it slip from my grasp. I quickly bent to retrieve it, bumping my shoulder against the steel workbench. "Sorry, I'm a little uncoordinated today." Amaya set the box on my main drafting table. The cardboard was disintegrating from the moisture. She carefully pulled back the flaps. Inside, nestled in layers of damp foam and dark velvet, were dozens of shattered shards of iridescent glass. Deep, oceanic blues and vibrant, metallic golds caught the furnace light in jagged fragments. It resembled a ruined galaxy. "This is the Cielo Doro," she murmured, the formal edge of her voice faltering for just a second. "My father commissioned it 20 years ago. It is the centerpiece of the Hall Gallery." I recognized the work immediately. It was a masterpiece of layered thermal color, incredibly fragile and notoriously difficult to cast. "What happened to it?" Amaya's spine straightened into a rigid line. She reached into her tote bag, pulled out her phone, and placed it on the steel table next to the shards. She tapped the screen, playing a saved voicemail on speaker. The audio was crisp, corporate, and laced with absolute condescension. "Amaya, it's Tyler. I received the automated legal alert regarding the gallery floor incident. Since the centerpiece is destroyed, the gallery's overall valuation drops below the threshold we agreed upon in the trust mandate. The board meets next Friday for the quarterly appraisal. Without that piece intact for the assessors, the family trust defaults to my management, and I am liquidating the building. Don't make this harder than it has to be." She stopped the recording. "My brother," she noted. "He had his preferred contractors moving display lighting yesterday, and one of them managed to back a motorized lift directly into the central pedestal. Tyler claims it was an unfortunate accident. I have 8 days until the board appraisal. If this sculpture isn't whole by then, the gallery is gone." She met my eyes directly. "I need you to fix it." I focused on the shards. The damage was catastrophic. The molecular bonds between the different colored glass layers were completely severed. To fix this meant reheating the fragments, calculating the precise thermal expansion coefficient for each color, and fusing them without introducing a sudden temperature shift that would fracture the entire structure into dust. It was exactly the kind of high-wire, high-risk work my old mentor used to do, right before the accident. Before I miscalculated a threshold and caused the crucible failure that destroyed his studio, taking my confidence with it. "Miss Hall," I started, shifting my weight back from the table. "This is incredibly delicate. I'm just a guy who makes cups now. I'm clumsy. I trip over my own feet. I'd probably just ruin what little you have left." A slight tremor shook her fingers. When she reached for the edge of the steel table, her knuckles turned completely white, the tendons straining under the fluorescent lights. The reality of her brother's administrative trap was closing in on her. I didn't offer a platitude. I turned away, walked over to my break station, and filled a thick ceramic mug with hot water from the electric kettle. I dropped a chamomile tea bag inside, grabbed a dry shop towel, and walked back. I set the mug down, gently inches from her gripping fingers. "Here. Drink this," I offered. She stared at the rising steam, then wrapped her hands around the ceramic, absorbing the warmth. "Please, Nixon, I don't have anyone else. The gallery is my entire life. It's the only thing my father built that Tyler hasn't dismantled and sold for parts." I studied the shards again. The blue was magnificent. I reached into my canvas apron pocket and pulled out a pair of digital calipers and my thick, magnification reading glasses. The exact second the tools touched my skin, the awkwardness vanished. My hands stopped hovering. I didn't stumble. I picked up a piece of the shattered blue glass, holding it up to the orange ambient light of the furnace, turning it to inspect the fracture lines. "The blue is a cobalt additive," I observed, my voice dropping into its working cadence, smooth, methodical, stripping away the emotion to focus on the physics. "The gold is actual gold leaf encased in a clear crystal matrix. If I bring the secondary kiln up to exactly 1050 degrees, I can soften the jagged edges without melting the core structure. But I will need to formulate a custom clear batch of raw silica to act as a thermal binder." I turned the shard, measuring the thickness of the edge with the digital calipers. 4 millimeters. It is incredibly thin. Amaya stood perfectly still, watching my hands. The only sound in the room was the roar of the fire and the rain drumming on the metal roof. "I'll need to run a stress test on a small fragment first," I continued, setting the shard back onto the velvet with extreme care, aligning it perfectly with its neighboring piece. "If the temperature changes too fast, the internal stress will shatter it inside the annealing oven." I paused, realizing the implication of my own words. I had just accepted the job. I pulled my glasses off, immediately dropping them onto the steel table with a sharp clack. "Ah, sorry." Amaya ignored the noise. She set her mug down, pulled a formal contract from her tote bag, and placed it on the steel. "I brought terms. My assistant, Leia, drafted them this morning. I will pay your full emergency rate, plus whatever raw materials you need to source, and I will be here every day to assist and document the chain of custody for the insurance adjusters." "You really don't have to do that," I protested, waving a hand at the dusty room. "It's loud in here, and hot, and I'm not great company. It's my legacy on that table, Nixon. I'm not leaving it." She pulled a fountain pen from her bag, signed the bottom line, and handed the pen to me. I took it, my knuckles brushing the thick, damp paper. 8 days, I confirmed, signing my name with a messy, uneven scrawl. By Thursday morning, a stark white espresso cup was already waiting on the metal desk before I even ignited the secondary kiln. Amaya arrived at 7 sharp, bringing the rich, dark scent of roasted coffee that cut cleanly through the smell of burnt cherry wood paddles and hot metal. She claimed the battered desk near the office door, setting up her laptop to coordinate with Leia and battle Tyler's lawyers while I worked the glass. I was terrified of making a mistake in front of her. On Friday morning, I tripped over the main air compressor hose, catching myself just before crashing into a tool rack. I felt my face burn with embarrassment, scrambling to untangle my boots. Amaya simply glanced up from her screen. "Are you okay?" "I'm just naturally uncoordinated," I admitted, refusing to meet her eyes as I kicked the hose flat. "My feet don't always listen to my brain." She observed the massive furnace, then returned her attention to my workspace. "I find that hard to believe. 10 minutes ago, You rolled a molten cylinder of glass so perfectly it looked like it was spun by a machine. You don't waste a single millimeter of movement at that bench. I focused on the concrete floor. Glass makes sense, I murmured, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. It follows absolute rules. Heat it to a specific degree. It expands. Cool it along a mathematical curve. It contracts. People are harder to calculate. I usually break things when I'm not holding a blowpipe. I turned back to the Marver. I need to check the test batch. In the kiln, we established a functional, quiet rhythm. She learned that I needed the loading doors propped open slightly at noon to vent the excess heat, and she would arrange the metal stops without me asking. I learned that whenever she received a communication from her brother, she would rub her left temple with 2 fingers, a physical tell of her rising panic. I was shaping a molten gather of clear silica on the thick steel table when I noticed her doing it again. She was staring at her laptop screen, her jaw clamped shut, 2 fingers pressing hard into her temple. I kept my hand steady on the blowpipe, returning the glass to the glory hole to maintain its core temperature. What did the email say? I asked, raising my voice over the flames. Amaya blinked, startled that I had noticed. It's Tyler, she answered, her voice strained. He sent a formal legal notice. He weaponized the timeline. The board just moved the appraisal. It's not next Friday anymore. It's this coming Tuesday. 4 days from now. I stopped turning the metal pipe. 4 days? That cuts our annealing time entirely in half. If I pull a fused piece of glass that thick out of the cooling oven too fast, the internal thermal stress will fracture it from the inside. He knows that. Amaya replied, standing up rapidly, her chair scraping against the concrete. She walked over to the edge of the painted yellow safety line, her arms crossed tight over her chest. He knows I hired someone to fix it. He engineered a default scenario to ensure the restoration fails before the adjusters arrive. She stared at the scattered shards resting on the velvet. Maybe I should just let him force the sale. I'm fighting a corporate war. I don't have the capital to win. I pulled the pipe from the fire, resting it securely on the steel yoke. I wanted to step over the yellow line. I wanted to reach out, but my hands were covered in soot. I was wearing protective gear, and that wasn't what she needed. She didn't need comforting words. She needed a structural solution. When I was 22, I shared. Projecting clearly over the machinery, I ruined my mentor's studio. I pushed a massive melt too fast. Because we were behind on a lucrative deadline, the crucible cracked under the thermal shock. 300 pounds of molten glass spilled across the floor. It destroyed his equipment, and it destroyed his business. Amaya turned her head, her eyes widening slightly at the admission. I took every commercial cup and pitcher order I could find, and I paid him back every cent over 5 years. I continued, staring at the glowing orange glass on the end of my pipe, but I couldn't fix the fact that I let a deadline make me reckless. I decided I was a liability to high-end art. I hid in the shop. I turned my head, holding her gaze. Tyler is trying to make you reckless. He wants you to panic so you make a mistake. We aren't going to panic. We are going to map out the thermal cooling curve on the whiteboard. We are going to calculate the exact threshold of the Ventura technique, and we are going to beat his deadline mathematically. Amaya took a slow, deep breath. Her shoulders dropped an inch as the logic anchored her. I need you to step back to the office area for the next 12 hours, I instructed. Because I'm bringing the main furnace up to 2200 degrees to formulate the binder, and the ambient temperature is going to spike. Saturday morning arrived, and the studio felt like a pressure cooker. I had successfully fused the main body of the Cielo Doro during the night shift, painstakingly layering the custom clear glass over the fractured gold and blue segments. It was currently sitting inside the computerized annealing oven, slowly dropping in temperature degree by agonizing degree. Amaya was sitting at her desk, organizing the provenance documents and chain of custody logs required for the appraisal. I watched her pull her reading glasses off and rub the bridge of her nose in frustration. The hinge on the left arm of her glasses was loose, causing the frame to sit crooked on her face. She kept having to push them up every time she referenced a document. I walked over to my precision tool bench, retrieving a micro screwdriver I typically used for calibrating the digital thermal sensors. I approached her desk. "Can I see those for a second?" I asked. She looked up, confused, but handed the glasses to me without question. I took them, gripping the delicate tortoiseshell frame with extreme care. It took 3 precise turns of the tiny screw to tighten the hinge. I pulled a clean microfiber cloth from my pocket, wiped a smudge off the left lens, and set them back onto her desk. "They won't slide anymore," I murmured, turning to walk back to my bench. Amaya picked them up, sliding them onto her face. They fit flawlessly. A soft, unspoken realization settled in her posture. "Thank you, Nixon." Before I could formulate an awkward reply, the metal door of the studio rattled loudly. It swung upward, and a man in a tailored navy suit walked in. He surveyed the dusty industrial space with obvious distaste, stepping over a puddle of water near the entrance. "Tyler?" Amaya said, standing up immediately, her spine snapping into a line of pure defense. "Amaya," he replied, stepping over a heavy yellow power cord. He didn't bother to acknowledge me. "I came to check on the investment. I saw the amended insurance asset location filing this morning. Did you really think moving the collateral off-site wouldn't trigger an automatic board notification?" "You shouldn't be here," she countered, her voice uncompromising. "This is a private, active workspace. You are violating safety protocols. I'm a concerned board member verifying company assets," Tyler sneered, walking purposefully toward the main workbench. He reached his hand out toward the digital control panel of the annealing oven. "Is this where the junk is cooking? You know, if it's not perfectly restored and on its pedestal by Tuesday morning, the insurance adjusters will formally classify it as a total loss." "Do not touch that panel," I warned. The absolute authority in my tone cut through the ambient noise of the room. "If you alter that cooling cycle by a single degree, the piece will shatter." Tyler paused, his hand hovering inches from the buttons, finally turning to face me. "And who is the handyman?" "I'm the master glassblower restoring the piece you attempted to destroy," I answered plainly, refusing to break eye contact. Tyler laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Right. Well, keep playing with your arts and crafts. Tuesday at 9 a.m., Amaya. Don't be late." He turned back to the oven, lifting his finger again to tap the glass readout screen. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed a plastic bucket of quenching water from the floor, intentionally stumbling my boot forward against the concrete. I pitched my weight awkwardly and let the bucket tip. 2 gallons of cold, murky water splashed directly across Tyler's expensive Italian leather shoes and soaked the hem of his tailored suit pants. "What is wrong with you?" Tyler shouted, jumping back wildly, shaking his wet legs. "Oh, no. I'm so sorry," I offered, my voice perfectly apologetic, though my hands were steady at my sides and my posture remained relaxed. "I'm incredibly clumsy. I trip over everything in here. I warned you. You really shouldn't stand in the active work zones. It's a major safety hazard for visitors." Amaya covered her mouth with her hand, masking a sudden, sharp smile. Tyler glared at me, his face flushing dark red. He checked his ruined shoes, then glared at Amaya, realizing he had lost control of the room. "Tuesday," he snapped, turning on his heel and squelching angrily out the metal door. When the door slammed shut, the room fell into a quiet calm. I casually picked up the empty bucket. "I really am clumsy," I noted. Amaya walked over to my side of the safety line. She didn't laugh. She studied the puddle on the floor, then looked up at my face. "You did that on purpose." "I have no idea what you're talking about," I replied, setting the bucket aside and checking the digital readout Tyler had tried to touch. But he needed to leave. The oven requires absolute stillness. Monday night was the final shift. The Cielo d'Oro had to come out of the kiln, receive its final thermal polish, and be mounted onto its weighted steel base. The studio was completely silent. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the night air crisp and clear. Amaya stood by the workbench, watching me. This was the singular moment of truth. If the internal molecular stresses hadn't resolved during our expedited mathematical cooling cycle, The glass would fracture from the inside the exact moment the colder room air touched it. I strapped on my leather gloves. I unlatched the kiln door. The heat rolled out, a manageable, ambient warmth. I reached into the chamber and gripped the heavy base of the sculpture. "Here we go," I breathed. I lifted the massive piece out and set it gently onto the padded steel table. It was whole. The custom clear silica I had formulated had seeped perfectly into the microscopic fractures, acting as a flawless optical glue. The cobalt blue and the gold leaf were fused together, trapped in a seamless, dense wave of crystal. It didn't look broken anymore. The faint lines where the traumatic breaks had been now looked like intentional, brilliant veins of light within the structure. It was magnificent. Amaya exhaled a shaky, profound breath. "Nixon, it's incredible. It's actually better than it was before." I checked the structural integrity with the polarized light filter, I confirmed, pulling my gloves off and setting them aside. "It's solid. It will pass the appraisal without question." She walked around the table, her eyes shining in the dim overhead light of the shop. I caught the scent of her perfume again, cedar and vanilla, grounding and real. I immediately shoved my bare hands deep into my apron pockets because the urge to reach out and touch her face was overwhelming. I forced myself to stay still, respecting the professional boundary we had maintained. "You saved me," she whispered, looking up at me. "You had the logistics plan," I deflected. "I just followed the thermal instructions." She shook her head, rejecting my humility. "No. You took the risk. You didn't let him bully us, and you didn't let the compressed deadline break your focus." She held my gaze, her expression completely open. "You aren't a liability, Nixon. You are the most capable man I know." I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. I wanted to tell her how much her presence had changed the air in this room, but I forced my focus back to the practical reality of the deadline. We need to box it up securely. The board meeting is at 9, Tuesday morning. The hall gallery. The primary boardroom was stark, lined with frosted glass walls overlooking the downtown skyline. Tyler sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by 2 senior board members and an independent insurance adjuster. Amaya stood at the opposite end, projecting absolute calm. I stood back against the far wall, near the door, keeping my hands folded in front of me. I wore a clean button-down shirt, feeling entirely out of place without the comforting hum of the machinery at my back. "Amaya," Tyler started, checking his watch with an air of boredom. "Let's make this quick. The insurance forms require your signature acknowledging the total loss of the primary asset, triggering the trust transfer." Amaya ignored him. She signaled toward the hallway. Leia, her assistant, pushed open the double doors and wheeled in a display cart draped in a thick black cloth. "There is no loss," Amaya declared. Her voice commanded the entire room. She grabbed the edge of the cloth and pulled it back in one swift motion. The Cielo Doro caught the morning sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It gleamed, magnificent and perfect, the blue and gold twisting together flawlessly, refracting light across the mahogany table. The independent insurance adjuster stood up immediately, pulling out a jeweler's loop, leaning in to inspect the surface tension of the glass. Tyler's face dropped into a mask of pure shock. "This is impossible. The incident report documented it was in pieces." "It was damaged," Amaya corrected, her tone icy and authoritative. "And it was professionally restored. Fully documented, legally logged, and structurally stable under restoration testing." She dropped a thick, organized folder containing my thermal charts, the chemical breakdowns, and the chain of custody logs onto the table directly in front of him. "The gallery's valuation stands well above the threshold. The trust remains under my direction. You do not have the board votes to force a sale." Tyler reviewed the irrefutable paperwork, then the flawless glass, and finally focused on me leaning against the wall. He realized his leverage was completely gone. "Fine," he snapped, standing up abruptly and buttoning his jacket. "But you're managing a dying business model." "Amaya?" He walked out, the 2 board members following awkwardly behind him, recognizing the shift in power. Amaya stood at the head of the table, her hands resting flat on the wood, claiming her space and her legacy. The insurance adjuster nodded respectfully, signing the validation form on his clipboard. Amaya turned and looked directly at me. "I'll go pack up my tools," I offered, pushing off the wall. "I'll send Leia the final invoice this afternoon." I didn't wait for her to answer. I walked out of the gallery and back into the busy street. My job was done. The crisis was averted. I belonged in my shop, dealing with noise and heat and predictable physics, not navigating the polished floors of a high-end gallery. 2 days passed. The studio felt overwhelmingly empty. The silence was more oppressive than it had ever been before she arrived. I was sweeping the concrete floor near the annealing oven, accidentally knocking the wooden broom handle against the metal leg of the drafting table, when the bay door clicked and swung open. Amaya walked in. She wasn't wearing a formal trench coat today. She wore a comfortable sweater and dark jeans. She surveyed the shop, taking in the floating dust, the organized hand tools, the low, comforting glow of the glory hole. "You sent the invoice," she said, stopping near the yellow safety line. "Yeah. Leia processed it this morning. Thank you." I leaned the broom carefully against the brick wall. "I told the board exactly who executed the restoration," Amaya continued, taking a step closer. "Leia already drafted the press release. We cleared the gallery's back room for a live demonstration setup, and your first solo exhibition is booked for the second week of next month. 2 other gallery owners have already called asking for your contact information." I froze, my hand still resting on the broom handle. "Amaya, I don't do shows. I don't." "You don't hide anymore," she stated, her voice gentle but holding an immovable boundary. "I won't let you. You are a master, Nixon. The city needs to see what you can build." She walked closer, deliberately stepping over the yellow power cord I always tripped on. She stopped right in front of me. "I was sitting in my silent office today," she confessed, looking up into my eyes, "and I realized I was rubbing my temple, just waiting for the sound of the furnace, waiting for you to drop something." I let out a short, breathy laugh, the tension breaking. "I am a walking disaster." "You're not," she corrected softly. "You're exactly who I needed." She tilted her head slightly, asking, "Do you think about the future, Nixon? Beyond just the next cup or pitcher?" I studied her face. I thought about the isolation I had built around myself, the walls I had constructed out of past guilt. And then I thought about the last 2 weeks, the way her unyielding presence had made the air in this room breathable again. I turned and walked over to the dry erase board mounted near the office door. I uncapped a black marker and wrote Hall Gallery Demo, Nov 12, right beneath my supply inventory. She watched me do it, a slow smile spreading across her face. For the first time, the studio schedule had a shared routine. I walked back to her and reached into my apron pocket. I didn't stumble. I didn't hesitate. I pulled out a heavy brass key, the master key to the studio doors, and held it out. As I went to place it in her hand, my thumb caught the rough canvas fabric of my pocket, and the key slipped, clattering loudly against the concrete floor between us. We both looked down at the key, then back up at each other. A genuine, warm laugh escaped her, bright and clear over the hum of the machinery. I bent down, picked it up, and finally placed it securely into her palm. I replied, "I can't stop thinking about our future." She looked down at the brass key, her fingers closing tightly around the cool metal, accepting the weight of it. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She just stepped forward, resting her forehead against my chest, right over my heart. I wrapped my arms around her shoulders, holding her steady, knowing with absolute certainty that I wouldn't drop her. I learned that true competence isn't about never making a mistake. It's about knowing how to repair what gets broken. A healthy partnership thrives on consistency and mutual respect, stepping up to the line together instead of forcing the other to shrink. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.